So just before we start, just the learning objectives for tonight, what I'd like to take you through is, first of all, introduce you to our two habitual tendencies of using our minds, our two mind settings, which can be summed up by on and off, very simply. We'll talk about the perils of productivity or the addiction to stimulation, why switching off is not always restful. I'll introduce you to mindfulness as a third way of using our minds, so a third alternative mind setting. And we'll try that out with a mindfulness practice that I've picked out for tonight. And then I thought maybe after the refreshment break we can talk about any of the benefits or the neuroscience research on mindfulness, if there's interest in the room, or anything else that you'd like to talk about. So the more informal part after the refreshments at 9:30. So undoubtedly there are many reasons why we are sometimes suffering from mental health issues, and I would say that most of us at some point in our lives will have challenges in that respect. And undoubtedly there are many external factors and conditions that can contribute to and catalyze mental health challenges. But in this talk I would like to go inwards and really explore to what extent what lies at the heart of many of our problems is a dysfunctional way of using our minds. So I'd like to invite you to do a little thought experiment. So really try and visualize this. Imagine having to go into a room without any company, with no books, no magazines, a plain room with nothing to look at, not an interesting room like this one, maybe not even a window, nothing to observe, nothing to entertain yourselves, no pen or paper to write anything down, and most importantly, no screens. And yes, I mean not even your own phone. So just you and your mind. How does that sit with everyone? Well, I can tell you, it depends. It could be absolute hell or absolute heaven. So it's no coincidence that solitary confinement is used as the ultimate punishment in many prisons. Yet for a seasoned meditator like this nun who spent 9 years in a cave in the Himalayas, 3 of which in solitary meditation retreat, this is called a retreat. It's a reward. So in the words of John Milton, the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Blaise Pascal, the 17th century French mathematician, philosopher, polymath, even went so far as to say that all men's miseries derive from not being able to sit in a room alone. And the American novelist Anne Lamott has said, "My mind is like a bad neighborhood. I try not to go there alone." So our minds can be our best friends, our strongest allies, but they can also be our worst enemies. And I would say it's all a function of to what extent we've actually managed to cultivate and train our minds. So this thought experiment that I did with you was actually conducted for real by researchers in a series of 11 studies. And they found, and let me read you the full quote, that participants typically did not enjoy spending 6 to 15 minutes in a room by themselves with nothing to do but think. that they enjoyed doing mundane external activities much more, and that many preferred to administer electric shocks to themselves instead of being left alone with their thoughts. And the researchers concluded most people seem to prefer to be doing something rather than nothing, even if that something is negative. So the participants in this study were given a choice in one of the studies, that an alternative to being stuck in the room by themselves with nothing to do but think, they were given the option of sticking their hand in a little electric socket to give themselves a mild electric shock. And a shock that they said previously when they tried it out they would pay to avoid. And yet, the interesting statistic here is that more than 2/3 of men and 15% of women went for the shock. They found that preferable than being alone with their thoughts. The outlier even put their hand in the socket 180 times in the 15-minute period. So this just speaks volumes about how dysfunctional our minds can be and how unbearable we might find the company of our own minds when it's better to stick our hands in the electric socket.
Striking gender difference.
What's that?
There's quite a striking gender difference between them. Was it two-thirds of...
more than 2/3 of men and 15% of women. And it gives you, cause for concern when, the majority of leadership positions are actually held by men. So you might worry about that.
Yeah,
but without wanting to...
My comment was a bit of a trendy comment, sort of thing, I suppose.
Yeah. So we're literally addicted to stimulation. And we like to keep busy. We like to fill our time. Nobody has any excess time. And we like to work hard, keep occupied, work too hard sometimes. And when our mind is not trained, what we're doing is we're actually putting a lot of pressure on the part of the brain that we rely on for higher order cognitive processing, rational thinking, strategic planning, and decision making. Because this comes with several limitations, as we're told by neuroscientists. So this part of the brain that we rely on, the executive center, or the prefrontal cortex, is just the area behind our forehead. It's hugely energy intensive. Although it only takes up 2% of the volume of the brain, it takes up 20% of energy resources. So think about it as an expensive, uneconomical car that gobbles up too much fuel, and it's not very economical to run. We have limited working memory capacity, which means that the executive center can only hold online a handful of pieces of data. So a bit like a computer that, when you have 5 programs running, it starts to get slower. So this is what's happening in the brain. It's a serial processor, so we can, far from being able to multitask, as many of us like thinking they can, we actually process information in a serial way. And we switch, when we think we're multitasking, we switch from one task to another, usually with huge repercussions on the quality of our work. Our attention span is usually quite limited, sadly less than that of a goldfish, who apparently has 9 seconds attention span, and ours is now 8.9, I think it is. And that's down from the year 2000, when it used to be 12 seconds. So we're going downhill in that respect. And I think mobile phones and all the rest of the smart equipment that we have makes us a little less able to focus. And last but not least, it's been called the Goldilocks of the brain by neuroscientist Amy Arnsten, who conducted some research in that matter in that area, and concluded that the neurochemical balance of our neurotransmitters has to be just right. The dopamine and the noradrenaline in the prefrontal cortex have to be at the right level and in the right proportions to each other for us to function at peak performance, to give our best. So if we have too little stimulation, we are on the left-hand side. I don't know if you can read it, but we fall into lethargy, apathy, boredom. We're spacing out. We're phasing out. We're getting sleepy, and we might even fall asleep. If we have too much stimulation, too much of those neurotransmitters coursing around our prefrontal cortex, then we are very prone to stress, anxiety, burnout, and in the worst case scenario, even cognitive shutdown altogether. The prefrontal cortex can just shut up shop, basically. So as you can see here, the actual the bandwidth for optimal performance, that sweet spot right here at the top of the curve, there's a very narrow bandwidth at which we can actually perform at our best. So the idea, which is current in many companies, that we can have 10 to 12 hours of productive work time during a working day, is just not made with our brains in mind. But this is the untrained brain. So just a quick excursion into neuroscience and the attentional networks, just to give you a bit more information on that. So we have the top-down attention network, which is the attention network that deals with task-focused activities. Well, the executive center that we're talking about. So this is voluntary, it's goal-oriented, it's selective, as you know, you can't focus on everything, you have to be selective. It's focused activity, and it's controlled and therefore effortful. So this is what we're using, and it gets depleted and exhausted and tired and losing concentration very quickly when it's untrained. And then we have the bottom-up attention network, that of reorienting, and that's the salience-driven network, the stimulus-driven network. So if you hear a loud siren outside, or a loud bang, or you smell fire burning, or something like that, we are immediately, this is the automatic attention network. So it's involuntary, it's automatic, it's instinctive, it's receptive, it's open and peripheral, so we can absorb the stimulus and immediately react to it, and therefore it's effortless and it's automatic. And these two sort of complement each other. So we might be focusing on our work and be, focusing and concentrating quite well, and then we hear a loud bang and we are startled. And that, it's a good thing to do, because we need to survive, and this is to help us protect our lives, basically, for evolutionary reasons. But what we haven't learned, and which is a skill that we learn when we start to meditate, especially if we practice attentional meditation, also called shamatha meditation, we are learning to use our minds in such a way that concentration doesn't have to come at the expense of relaxation. Goal-directedness doesn't have to come at the expense of losing a presence of mind, a stillness of mind. And mental acuity doesn't have to mean that you're burning out more quickly. So this is just a nice picture to show you the two attentional networks. So the goals of attentional training in meditation, in this particular type of meditation that I'm talking about, which trains the attention, which is called shamatha, we're training 3 different qualities of mind. So we learn how to develop relaxation without spacing out, without losing the clarity which we have right now when we are active and thinking. We learn to develop stability without sacrificing the relaxation we are developing and we've cultivated. And then we learn to develop higher clarity, acuity, perceptiveness, and vividness of attention without sacrificing the stability, the attention span, if you like. And these 3 qualities are cultivated together and balancing each other out in 3 different ways. So that's all I want to say about this type of meditation at this stage. But just to give you an idea that, when neuroscientists talk about the limitations in our executive center, they're talking about the untrained mind. And when we use meditation and we cultivate these skills, we can actually develop a different way of using our minds, even when it's switched on. Yeah? So, what happened? So that was the on mode, when we are switched on, right? And it comes with its limitations, this addiction to stimulation, and the exhaustion that can happen when we focus for too long, when we're not trained. So what happens when we switch off? Let's explore that off state a little bit. And I want to do a little experiment and give you 1 minute, and I'll time that on my phone, just 1 minute to go into the off mode, to take your brain offline, if you like, and just to think of nothing really, just give your brain a rest. And then we'll see what happens there. So I'll put my timer on for 1 minute. Okay. So time's up, and I'd really like to hear from a few of you how you found that experience, and particularly what happened for you. And I guess I want to hazard a guess here, and please give me a show of hands if the following applies to you. So I asked you to do nothing, to give your brain a rest and relax, right? And I'm just wondering if there might have been a few of you, and please don't feel strange about that, because it's all completely normal, and it happens every time I do this exercise with people, the same sort of things come up. So when we're doing nothing, we might be thinking about the past. So the past meaning, it could be just something I said just 10 minutes ago, and it's still going around in your mind. Or it could be something that happened on the way to this hall tonight, or it could be something this morning, or anything that happened this week or last week, or maybe even a distant memory might have come up. Was that the case for anyone? Yeah? A few hands are going up. Okay, so this is, we're all familiar with this, is remembering, right? Memories coming up to do with the past. Okay, so now let's think. What also might have happened is that you might be projecting yourselves forward into the future and thinking about what will happen after this talk. Maybe on the way home, maybe you're feeling a bit peckish and you're thinking of dropping into a restaurant or to the supermarket and getting something to eat, or you're wondering what's at home, or maybe you're thinking about some deadline that's coming up at work or some other thing that you have to take care of. Was that the case for anyone? Yeah? A few hands? Okay. So that's called prospecting, so thinking about the future. So we had the past, the future, and then the other thing that could have happened is you could have been commenting on what was happening in the present moment, having a view about it, analyzing it, elaborating on it, thinking what is she doing with this exercise, judging it, liking it, disliking it, reacting to it. Was that the case for anyone?
Very much so.
Yeah? Okay. So commenting, I called it commenting here. It's also called, a bit more fancy, cognitive elaboration. And that can happen on the is that you were thinking about yourself, something that's called self-referential processing. And please don't feel that it shows you to be selfish by doing that, because it's perfectly normal. We think about ourselves I'm feeling hungry, I'm bored, I'm this, I'm that. And that's called self-referential processing, or also called selfing, just for short. Did that happen to anyone?
Isn't it almost inevitable that it would go with the sort of commenting thing a bit, maybe, or commentating perhaps?
Be, could be.
I think of a sort of a defiant thing, saying theoretically, on the face of it, it's very easy, just be quite brilliant, and immediately sort of feeling there was a defiant, something defiant saying, let's have a smart answer for this and disrupt whatever. I'm not shocked by that, because I've observed that sort of thing quite often, but
yes.
It's so easy that it kicks in.
Yeah, absolutely. We do it a lot of the time. So self-referential processing. And then the other thing that could have happened is that you were thinking about someone else, what someone else said. Maybe me, because I'm standing here and you've been hearing what I've been saying. So you might have been taking a perspective on what I've been saying. And that's called perspective taking in neuroscience, or theory of mind. So thinking about what other people are saying and maybe putting yourself in my position or seeing things from my perspective. Did that happen to anyone? No? Sometimes it happens, doesn't always have to happen. So any of these could have happened, or a combination of the above. Was there anything that I haven't covered that might have come up? Yes?
Just taking in the sounds from outside.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah, that's the same for me. I was just listening to the cars and...
Okay. Okay.
I couldn't just do nothing, so I was just focusing on my breath, my breathing.
Yeah. So you gave yourself something to do, right? You gave yourself something to do, and that often happens, because I didn't really say, listen to the sounds, listen to that, or listen to your breath. That wasn't the purpose. I just wanted to see what's going to happen. And so often when we don't have a particular task, we give ourselves something to do, and we decide to focus on this or on that. And again, perfectly normal, right? And so this has actually been I would call it a revolutionary discovery in neuroscience, only dating back to 2001, when they discovered that when the brain is not actively processing in a task-oriented way, when we're not working on a particular task in a goal-oriented or task-focused way, our brain goes into what is called the default mode, and our default mode is very much that of mind-wandering, daydreaming, fantasizing, ruminating, right? So that is our default mode, and this was discovered only in 2001, and I must say contemplatives and meditators had discovered that thousands of years before, so it wouldn't have come as a surprise to them to hear that. But in terms of neuroscience, the common belief was that our brain, when we're not focusing on a task, when you put people in an MRI scanner, when you're not focusing on a task because they're given tasks to do, then they said to them, well, go in your rest state, in your baseline, in your default mode. And people actually were overly active, and the brain wasn't quiet and still as the neuroscientists expected. But in fact, in many cases, the brain was more active than when they were focusing on a task. And you can see with the variety of activities that we discussed how that could be the case. So this is the default mode network. And so back to the attentional networks here. So we have these two opposing mind settings, on and off, that I mentioned. And just to sum them up, so the task positive network is the one that's engaged when we're working on a task, when we're using our executive center. And it's characterized by focused attention, mental effort, goal-directed information processing, and higher order cognitive processing. Okay, so it's all effortful and higher order. And then there's the task negative network, which basically means we're not working on a task, we're having a rest, the resting state, which, as has been seen, is full of stimulus-independent thoughts, so thoughts that are not related to particular tasks, random thoughts. It's called the resting state, but it's not really that restful. It's characterized by self-referential thinking, by retrospective or prospective memory, thinking about the future and the past, and theory of mind, as we said. So these two work in as a seesaw effect. So if you're really focusing very well and you're in a kind of state of flow, which you might have experienced when you enjoy a particular task, then your default mode is very quiet. But when you're starting to get a bit bored or you don't enjoy the task, you start ruminating, mind wandering, daydreaming, fantasizing. So they work, when one's strong, the other one is subdued, and vice versa. You had a question?
Yes, referring to what you said, that the neuroscientists found out that when people were not focusing,
yeah,
their minds were actually more busy.
Yeah.
Busier. Do they have a kind of a explanation about why this would be? Because it doesn't make sense, right? Here, logically speaking.
Well, there are various explanations. I mean, there is a certain value in having that time to process information or organizing information. Some of this is not just useless. Some of it is quite useful, activity, to have a sense of self and to have a sense of theory of mind, what other people are thinking, reflecting on that, taking a position. It makes us human. I don't think animals necessarily have that, the ability to take a perspective on what someone else is saying. So these are not without value, but what is a problem is when this default mode has gone into overdrive and it's a mind gone, a bit out of control. That is a problem. And just to illustrate again the different brain, don't worry about the colorful picture here. It's just to show that these brain networks are very distinct and they're anti-correlated. So when one's strong, the other one isn't, and vice versa. And so this default mode has been, by meditation teacher and scholar Alan Wallace, has been called or christened the obsessive compulsive delusional disorder, or OCDD, and that's slightly tongue-in-cheek and a bit provocative. But hear me out here. Why could we call this obsessive?
More control. We have more control over it.
Yeah, we can't. If you say to yourself, I want to stop my thinking, as you might have said when we did the exercise, how successful were you? How much control, how much free will did you have to actually tell your mind to shut up, And we often don't. We often don't. Some more than others, but again, it's a function of how trained our mind is to do that, how aware we are. Maybe, some of us might have not have been aware. I mean, I only heard about that when I studied neuroscience. I mean, I had the experience before, but I didn't have the awareness before I heard about the default mode.
Can I just
So,
ask a question?
yeah.
I'm a mindfulness instructor.
Yeah.
So I did a course based on finding peace in a frantic world.
Yes.
And Mark Williams was saying that it's not about telling your mind to shut up or anything, it's about viewing your thoughts in a different way.
Yes, and we'll get to that. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I'm just saying that
That's how most people... You're going to say that's how most people would think, to tell their thoughts to shut up.
No, that's not what it is about at all. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's not about telling your mind to shut up. I'm saying that we can call that default mode obsessive because it's constantly running, producing one thought after another. Sometimes we don't even find a gap between the thoughts because one thought is leading to another. It's a cascade, a waterfall of thoughts. So that would be the obsessive part. The compulsive part is... Any ideas? What would be compulsive?
We can't stop, can we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it's...
Yeah. So the compulsive, I would say it's the fact that we get hijacked by our thoughts and we get carried away to thinking about whatever comes into our mind. So if you thought, oh my God, I'm a bit hungry, you might have been fantasizing about, opening your fridge and taking out the food that you're planning to eat. So that's being carried away by the thoughts, not just having the thought. That's one thing, but being carried away and thinking about it. And then delusional, it would be... yeah. Mm-hmm.
Could you use the word addictive at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's another addiction. So and that's why, we often start producing thoughts because we have nothing else to do. And so our mind goes into overdrive. Yeah, absolutely. And then the delusional part would be that we tend to believe the thoughts that come up in our minds. And if you're anything like me, you might have had an experience when you might have, been awake at night at 4 o'clock in the morning, and these thoughts come up, and they tend to be not the pleasant thoughts, and you might start worrying about something that might be a slight concern during the day, but at night, oh, it's coming up, and you really think the end is nigh. And that will be the delusional part, because you start believing every thought that comes up. And again, that if you're suffering from schizophrenia, you have almost no control over that, and you have no ability to distinguish between what's really real and what's not real. But we all suffer to a certain extent from this.
I'm not sure this is right. I might be compulsive opening the fridge all the time to eat, even though I don't really need it. Then I might go for an exercise to get away from that, to take your mind off that, and therefore that can become addictive. Or is it delusional? So between the two, delusion goes both ways on this. Or you find the balance. You just want life with balance, but I'm working up the two extremes when most people who have issues probably are, I think. You see what I mean?
So what's your...
Well, one word can almost... I can link words there in parts of delusion, which one contradicts the other. I mean... I'm working my own template. I probably might.
So this is about
my own planet, obviously, but
Yeah. So this is just a way to sum up how sometimes dysfunctional our way of using our mind is. That when thoughts come up, we can't stop them. That will be the obsessive. Then the compulsive is getting carried away, and the delusional is believing everything that you think to be true. And so that's just a nice way of summing up how this can lead to a lot of suffering, actually. So when we are suffering from an overactive default mode, we're prone to this OCDD. Let's say we're unable to just sit there and enjoy the scenery, just be in the present moment and relax, and instead we start every thought that comes up, we fuse with it. We have this cognitive fusion, and our awareness becomes identified with the thought. So instead of holding all of the experiences that are there when we're sitting there, we are a thought comes up, and our awareness collapses and becomes as small as that thought. That's that sort of cognitive fusion.
Isn't it an enormous thing, or the enormous thing, the sense that when we talk about abandoning ourselves to the present moment and so on, if we no longer have the perception of time passing and all that sort of thing, then it's just that when there's a perception of duration of time, and then doesn't that always seem somehow burdensome? I don't mean you can stop the psychological time, sort of that sense of the passage of time. Can there be real suffering without?
Where would the suffering be?
Because, say, if you had a pain or something's disturbing you and it's momentary, and you're aware that it's passed in a moment or something, it's very different from having an idea of what you're familiar to be. Say 2 hours might be that you've got to endure something, or So same with if you're in the windowless room and so on. If you're fairly sure it's for a particular restricted period, it may be troublesome, but it's that power of the sense of time passing and so on. And well, I dare say, I mean, you go on to...
I would say that it's not really a function of how long it is or perceived time or anything like that. It's really about when our default mode is overly active and we are prone to this OCDD, tongue-in-cheek, then any thought that comes up, we're fusing with it. So we might be thinking, my back is sore. That's the self-referential processing. We might be thinking, does he still love me? So that will be in the sort of perspective-taking category. The deadline is killing me. So that's about the future. Or what's another one about the past? No, that meeting was awful. That's thinking about the past. Or was that 5 seconds of silence? That will be cognitive elaboration, or it's also self-referential processing, but it's also elaborating on the present moment. So I'm pretty good at this, self-referential processing. So you see that a lot of these thoughts that come up, we then latch onto them, We can't stop them, we latch onto them, we start thinking about them, rather than just being in the present moment.
But wouldn't you say that was the mind-body connection? I've got back pain, it creates the flight or flight, adrenaline, and then you get the amygdala hijack. Then the flight or fight, which causes the stress, and that's why you hang on to it, because...
It's a tendency. I hear what you're saying, I'm not denying any of it. You're right. It draws our attention to it when we have, and I've had back pain recently actually, and you kind of focus on it. But there is still a choice, and we'll explore that in a meditation, and then we can talk about that.
Yeah, I know there's a choice.
So there is that choice. So it's, this is not any moral judgment. It's just what happens when our default mode is overly active. And so our attention then follows the thoughts, fuses with the thoughts, and we identify with the thoughts. So, and again, when we have this overactive default mode, we're then prone to unhappiness, anxiety, attentional lapses. So when our mind is supposed to be switched on, and we want to focus on a task, we find that we are not necessarily able to focus because our thoughts are intrusive. And then when we try to switch off, go into that offline mode, off mode, we can't quite turn our minds off. And so the default mode has been, it's been said by scientists who've researched that 80% of the time the default mode revolves around negative, or is experienced as a negative state of mind, and it's prone to negativity bias. And this has evolutionary reasons, that we, in order to survive, we had to be more attuned to any threats that are coming up in the environment. We had to run away from those tigers that were chasing us so that we wouldn't become their dinner. And that's why we have evolved, and we are the descendants of of that species and of those who actually managed to survive. So we have that, there is an evolutionary reason for being hypersensitive to threat and risk and the negative. But it is an unhappy place. And so a study done in Harvard, quite a large-scale study, has looked at how much of the time people are actually focusing and being present in whatever they're doing at the time. And they've discovered that almost half of the time, I think it's 46.8 or 46.9% of the time, people are not present in the tasks. They're not really fully present with their minds in the tasks or in the activity that they were doing, whether that's working or whether that's talking to someone or anything. And so they've concluded that a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The ability to think about what is not happening, i.e. the past, the future, elaborating on the present, etc., is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost. Animals can't do it, I don't think, unless they've discovered otherwise in the meantime. But so it has a cost associated. It's an achievement, but it has a cost. And so, yeah.
Not associated with creativity, though.
I'm not aware of any studies on that. I'm not sure. It could be. I wouldn't say no, because I don't know of any studies. But
is imaginative, your imagination works.
Could be. There could be something like that. Yeah. So, and I would say it's not surprising then that a dysfunctional default mode has been associated with various mental health conditions. So in the case of schizophrenia, depression, ADHD and autism, it's been found that the default mode network has a hyperactivity or is an overactivity. And in the case of Alzheimer's disease, it's an underactivity or disconnectivity of the default mode. So it's associated, it's not caused by it, but it's associated with, so it's correlated. So what's the antidote? So this is where mindfulness comes in. So when we're mindfully aware, whether that's of the sensations of the breath or of the thoughts that are coming up for us, we are connecting with direct experience. And what we are observing is what is presented to our 6 senses, the 5 physical senses and the mental sense. So we are aware of the visual, the auditory, the olfactory, the gustatory and the tactile, as well as the mental awareness which can perceive thoughts as they're coming up. So when we are connected with this direct experience and we're tapping into direct experience, observing what is arising to our awareness, in that moment we're not caught up in cognitive elaborations. We are not getting carried away by abstractions and conceptualizations. But we are in the present moment observing reality as it is occurring to our 6 senses, if you like, the 5 physical and the mental. And so connecting with direct experience then calms down the turbulence of the conceptual mind. And the more we can subdue the default mode, which is a conceptual mind at work, going rampant, the more we can subdue that, the more it frees up the finite cognitive resources that we have to divert them back, channel them back into focusing on direct experience, creating this virtuous cycle.
I'm not sure, what's the distinction between experiencing the experience and observing the experience?
That's a good question. So observe, we can.
Okay, I don't want to like clip your wings.
It might become more obvious, but
I think about being present is actually being actively present and not the observer. So you're present, but you're a participant in that conversation or interaction. Like I'm just focusing on what you're saying now at the time. I'm not observing it. Taking it all in. You're an active participant, you're not an observer.
So when you're an active participant, you can be obviously, but and it will become clearer once we've done the practice, but when you're an active participant, there is a line of, are we fusing with the content of the experience, or are we maintaining a certain distance from which we're observing the experience? So let's do the practice and then hold that, and we can return to that, because that's an interesting question. Is that, can we do that? Because I'm about to start a practice.
If this helps, say that sort of thing, so if you're experiencing, then you're abandoned to the experience.
Exactly. When you're abandoned to the experience, you lose that critical distance, and you're fusing with that experience, identifying fully with it. Whereas observing is something else. And I'm just making the distinction. So that's exactly it. But we can see how it pans out in this particular practice that I'd like to introduce you to. So this is called mindfulness directed to the mind, one of the names one could give it. And so I'd invite you, how are we doing for time? Not too bad. So if you're all up to it, we could do this practice for about 10 minutes. Does that sound good? Okay. So take a comfortable position, and I will sit down for this and put my meditation timer on. Oops. So let's have a few moments to come back to the present moment, settling your body on the chair. I would suggest that the feet should be flat on the floor, just to make you most comfortable and in touch with the ground. And if you can sit away from the back of the chair a little bit, if that's okay for you, that would be preferable, but if it's causing you any challenges, then please don't do that. So let your spine be straight, your shoulders relaxed and dropped, And relax all the muscles in your face. And to the extent that you feel that your awareness is located up in the head, thinking, let your awareness descend down to the ground. To your buttocks, where they're in touch with the seat. To the feet that are in touch with the floor. Just being fully present in your body, in your experience of being embodied. And let your awareness rest in a witnessing mode, not thinking or analyzing, not visualizing, but just rest in this mode of, this non-conceptual mode. General comments, really, I would say that it's basically what I was trying to say there is that several mental health conditions are associated with a problem with the default mode, the way it's connected, either active or underactive, either a bit like the thyroid, like this, either over or under, but it's not functioning in the right way, it's not connected in the right way. So that's all I would say on that, and that it's correlated, it's not caused by it, but it has, there is a correlation between certain mental health conditions and the way that the default mode is connected. So it's not that there is something wrong in the default mode itself, or in that network, or in a particular node in the brain, but it's the way it functions. Right? The way it's coupled with other activities.
Do we know what causes that? Say in ADHD, is it...
It's definitely not my area of expertise, but I think that it's interesting to bear in mind that, that these things, I would say from my meditation experience and from being a meditator and looking at my mind, that a lot of these things are actually created by the mind, right? And that our mind then has an effect on how the brain works. So for me, from my personal experience and observation of the mind and the brain, and how the mind and the brain correlate, and this is a big question, so maybe it's a bit, it would be opening a can of worms, but from my perspective, it's that the mind, that the relationship goes both ways, and the mind can influence the brain, and obviously the brain can influence the mind as well, but they're not, from my perspective, they're not the same thing. Yeah?
And possibly, you're saying that this ADHD starts within the uterus, within.
Oh no! I have no idea how. I wouldn't. I really wouldn't want to say anything, because anything I would say, I wouldn't trust it. I'm not an expert on this, so.
So as regards to ADHD, possibly also diet as well. You think about epigenetics.
Could be, yeah. But just one thing I want to say about ADHD, and as I said, I'm not an expert in it, but I have some experience of meditation and of attentional training, and I know that this can have a very beneficial, because of neuroplasticity and the way that the brain is not static and it is actually responding to what we do with it. And when we put it to work in certain ways, and what we experience in our lives and what we think about actually influences the way our brain is wired. So we can change the way the brain is wired, and new neurons can be generated even into ripe old age.
Would that apply also to autism? Would you autism?
I'm not an expert in some of these conditions, but in terms of the attentional aspect, it can be, and I don't know how much it can be trained for those particular conditions, but I think mindfulness can definitely help with ADHD, and generally for. I don't. I'd be lying to you.
Sensory disorder.
Sorry?
Integrated sensory disorder.
I'm not aware of that. I'm not an expert in these things, so I'm talking from a meditator's point of view here. Mm-hmm.
Following up to what Michelle was asking.
Yeah.
I had some experience of working with the originators of the Sunrise program for autism, which is in America, and I think their program very much demonstrates that the same neuroplasticity applies to even the most severe autism.
Wow.
So they call the Autism Society of America, based in somewhere in New England. They did one of their introductory courses at the Royal Chase Hotel up on the Ridgeway a few years ago, and I had the privilege of working with them for a week there. And they did a film about their son, Raoul, who was so severely autistic that he was going to be put in an institution, according to the doctors. They said, just forget him, he's going to be a vegetable, basically.
Wow.
And they said, no way, we can do a lot better than that with love and with acceptance and mirroring and all. They developed the program that they have used and taught to people for the last 20, 30 years now. And he qualified from university, with the highest honours.
Wow.
And I went to hear him speak at Mile End, and he was the most charming, intelligent, wonderful guy giving a talk about, the work. And
Wow.
he'd been written off, so he was able to come out of that with the right handling.
Do you have that on your
That's great.
website?
Not on my website, but I can give you the details.
But the right hand being included mindfulness training.
Yeah, sorry.
Does mind work with the cognitive impairment? Would that help if there's an impairment there?
Again, I would say that it can help in all sorts of ways, and definitely with cognitive issues, with attentional issues, with emotional issues, and with motivational issues. And these would be the 4 areas of mental balance that I'm focusing on when I do meditation training.
Do you think it also
definitely
has an impact on the neuropaths as well?
Yeah, I mean, what we do with our minds influences how the brain is wired, how it functions, and also the structure of the brain changes. I mean, I might just show a few slides that I have. It's just 4 slides. So. Just focused here on some of the mindfulness, the benefits of mindfulness, especially in the cognitive area that we just talked about. So the benefits of mindfulness have been fall into these categories: sustained attention, so being able to sustain that attention that we talked about, our short attention span; perceptual acuity, so that sharpness, the mental clarity, the vividness that I talked about, which is part of the attentional training of mindfulness; working memory, again I mentioned how we can only hold about a handful of things in mind at any one time, like those computer programs, at the same time before we start to slow down. So it's been shown that mindfulness can improve that and increase our capacity for a bigger load of in working memory. And cognitive flexibility, so our ability to adapt to new situations, new thoughts, new things that come up cognitively. So being more flexible, less cognitively rigid and reactive, but being able to change and adapt. And what's interesting about that is that the mechanism in which mindfulness works to achieve these has been shown to be the ability to attenuate, to inhibit, to subdue the default mode network. So it's through that these benefits are experienced.
Would that be the case also with somebody with say, Alzheimer's?
With Alzheimer's, I'm a bit more doubtful, because you need a certain amount of cognitive control to be able to even practice. I don't know if there have been any studies where someone who has been a lifelong meditator and then gets Alzheimer's, if that actually helps slow it down. But if you have Alzheimer's and you're already losing that ability to be in control cognitively, I would doubt that can, it's the same with depression. It's been very beneficial mindfulness is very beneficial for depression, to prevent relapse, especially after you've had, let's say, 3 episodes of depression, where the likelihood of relapsing again is close to 100% apparently, or in the 90s. It works very well when you've actually trained and learned mindfulness when you are in not in an episode of depression, and then it can help. But if you're in the midst of a depression, you won't be able to practice it. You just don't have that ability to not fuse with your thoughts. That's the very problem. So it's important to kind of use it as a preventative measure. And just 2 slides on what the structural and the functional changes are. So structural brain changes that come about through mindfulness, and that basically means that there's more neural real estate, if you like, in the brain, more grey matter, more density in the brain, in regions associated with learning and memory, with stress regulation, with emotion regulation, with attention, and with bodily awareness of being embodied.
That's most of the brain, really.
It's quite a big part, yeah. And so there's structural changes, so increase in grey matter and density. And then the functional changes have to do with, you know, how the brain works. And so less rumination, which is what we've been talking about when we talk about the default mode, less rumination definitely is one of the hallmarks of practicing mindfulness. The increased openness to experience, also including negative experience, especially to negative experience. We can be with it, and so that's how the default mode is uncoupled. Normally, when we have negative experiences and sadness or anger or something negative comes up, we fuse with it and we evaluate that experience as negative. Whereas when you practice mindfulness, you're able to uncouple. So the experience comes up, it's still negative, but you can see, oh, there's a negative experience, but I'm not it. I'm not my anger. Because when you say, I am angry, I'm fusing my identity with anger. I am sad, I'm fusing my identity. I become, I collapse into that sadness or the anger or whatever it is. But when you've practiced for a while, the more you practice, you're able to disconnect, to uncouple. So the default mode is there, but you don't give it that, the evaluation is not there. So you can uncouple this and be with a negative experience without fusing with it, if that makes sense. And greater well-being. And so, what's the last slide? So long-term, just to finish that, and I'll take questions. So the long-term practitioners have a different default state, as we talked about, a different default state, not that of rumination and fusing with every thought that comes up and feeling every emotion, but they're able to replace that subjective fixation, if you like, that, I am my anger, I am my sadness, with something that's more objective, an ability to be more objective, and that has huge repercussions for being less biased, being less prone to anxiety and all the other mental health benefits and benefits for other areas of life, like in the case of bias, because there is a greater sense of objectivity, and someone mentioned detachment. Definitely this lack of attachment, which doesn't have to be dissociation and is not really dissociation. So these are some of the benefits of practicing mindfulness in terms of what the science has shown.
Could you just say the difference between awareness and mindfulness?
Okay, so this could be a kind of worms, but it doesn't have to be. So mindfulness, there's mindfulness as we understand it in the modern mindfulness movement, as defined by Jon Kabat-Zinn, is the awareness that arises when we attend in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. That's the modern definition of modern mindfulness. So we have a particular, it's a quality of awareness, of just being present with your experience, inner, outer, everything, being present and not judging that experience. And then there's the ancient definition of mindfulness, which means to be mindful of my thoughts means that I'm attaching my attention, my awareness to those thoughts. So I'm linked, I'm like hooking the thoughts, and I'm focusing on the thoughts and bearing those thoughts in mind. So it has that quality of bearing in mind, remembering the instructions, bearing those thoughts in mind without distraction and without forgetfulness, without being carried away to the referent of the thought, as we were practicing earlier, but also without spacing out and just sitting here with a blank mind. So that's the ancient definition of mindfulness. It's very different from the modern one.
Yeah. So in the second one, there's more emphasis on being aware that you're watching your own thoughts.
It's the quality of being. directing your awareness to an object.
But including the awareness of yourself.
Awareness,
But mindfulness, modern meaning of mindfulness, does that include that? The awareness of yourself watching?
Yes. So,
But
it does. It does.
Just the term awareness doesn't imply that you're aware of yourself watching. Isn't that the difference?
Yeah, I think the modern definition is a little bit less, it's a bit more broad, it's a bit more vague, because definitely the awareness of oneself is included in modern ideas about mindfulness. Yeah, so people think that it's part of modern mindfulness. But yeah, so it's used in slightly different ways. But awareness, I would say, if you want a definition of awareness, is that awareness is the ability to perceive appearances. To use a very sort of practical definition, is that ability. You only hear me because I appear to your awareness. You can only perceive thoughts because you have an awareness that detects those thoughts. If you didn't have awareness, which is synonymous with consciousness, you wouldn't be able to have any experience whatsoever. So that's awareness. So it makes manifest the appearances that appear to our minds, and it knows them. So it's two parts of the consciousness. It illuminates them, it makes them manifest. Yeah? It's like putting the light on. It's, think of the light as being consciousness, right? We switch the light on and we can see the room. We can see everything in the room and everybody in the room. So that's the luminous quality of awareness. And then the other thing is the cognizant quality of awareness, which means that we know what we're seeing. Oh, I see my friend Nicola here. I see my friend Barbara there.
But does that include naming? Does it include verbal?
No, it doesn't need to be verbal, but knowing something. It can be completely pre-verbal. But that is a very broad area now. But definitely, yeah. So it's that cognizance. It's illuminating the appearances, but also knowing the appearances, right? Because the light right now is luminous, but it's not cognizant. Doesn't know anything.
But does there have? You're talking about self-conscious, being able to reflect on one's own existence, sort of thing, whatever.
Yeah.
Because the light thing, because otherwise it would be like the thing that expression, the lights are on but nobody's home, sort of thing.
So you can direct that mindfulness, that ability to bear something in mind. You can direct that onto your own awareness, onto your own mind, as we did. That's what we did. We had directed the light of our awareness to the space of our mind and all the activities within it, right? And so that was mindfulness in that ancient sense, mindfulness directed to the mind. Yeah.
I did go on a self-awareness course about 40 years ago in the context of youth work, but this is the 70s, okay? And there were 10 of us were sitting around and we had a piece of paper, we had 10 qualities. We had sense of humour, confident, whatever. You marked everybody in the group. It's pretty brutal, actually. In the group, when you rated in the sense of humour, so somebody gave me a sense of humour to my left, 1 out of 10, somebody gave me 9, Perhaps that was the first beginnings of mindfulness or something, or it's not related to this at all. It was a way of getting away from delusions and how you see yourself, and you're not showing yourself, and people are telling you, well, that's how I see you. Get over it almost. It's a bit brutal, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if you would necessarily need to call that mindfulness, but
no, I don't know. It just
could be emotional intelligence, or yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So, if there are any more pressing questions, I'll take them. But I think I'm quite aware of time, so I don't want to overstep.
The history you mentioned about modern mindfulness practice and John Kabat-Zinn. Then you talked about ancient.
Yes.
What is the history of the word mindfulness? It's a fairly recent one, as far as I know.
No, that's the thing. So it's a big topic. So John Kabat-Zinn in the 70s took the word mindfulness and defined it in the way that I've said about non-judgmental, present moment, purposeful awareness. So being here and being aware of everything around me, inside, outside, etc. So he took that ancient word, which has ancient equivalents, or that's been translated from ancient languages like Pali and Sanskrit and other Asian languages, and he's defined it in a certain way, which is correct in his context, in the context of modern mindfulness, this is what it means. But so we need to be a bit, I didn't want to confuse things and bring too many things in. We've covered quite a lot of things here. So the ancient definition of mindfulness is the ability to bear in mind, and all these ancient languages have that connotation of remembering, recollection. You bear something in mind, so you're bearing in mind the meditation instructions without forgetfulness and without distraction, without getting carried away and without spacing out. So if you're watching your breath and you suddenly think about your dinner tonight, then you got distracted. If you're placing your mindfulness onto your breath and you suddenly go a bit like, oops, and then you've fallen asleep, oof, and then you wake up again, then you are suffering from forgetfulness, laxity. There are different words about that. And so the ability to bear something in mind without getting derailed in your attention, without getting distracted, without phasing out, that is mindfulness in the ancient context. So it's used very specifically, and it's part of every meditation. There's always in meditation, in this one that we did today, mindfulness was directed to the mind. When we were meditating on the breath, mindfulness is directed to the breath. So we're bearing the breath in mind. Here we're bearing the space of the mind in mind, and nothing else. It's very selective in the ancient definition, because when we are practicing attention, this shamatha meditation that I mentioned, which is basically attentional training, making our mind serviceable, so that we can put it to more, like wisdom quests. In order to make it serviceable, we need to tame our mind and to really know that we are focusing on this and we're not focusing on something else. So rather than being prescriptive, just to pick up on something we mentioned earlier, it's about knowing what is your object of mindfulness at any one time. And that's not the case in modern mindfulness, where we're kind of here and we're mindfully aware of all sorts of things that come up, right? But if in this ancient definition of mindfulness, when you're practicing training your mind, you really want to know, what is my object of mindfulness? What is my object of attention? And am I steering away from that object? Am I getting derailed? And then I'm bringing it back.
So when you talk about the ancient practice,
yeah.
Ancient mindfulness, are you talking about the definition of the word, or
yes.
a form of meditation practice going back thousands of years?
Yes, both. So mindfulness is part of every meditation practice that goes back thousands of years.
So what historical roots does
so it comes from
go back to?
John Kabat-Zinn was very influenced by Zen, by Theravada Buddhism, and maybe some other things as well. Yeah. And he picked and cherry-picked certain things and certain aspects that he then brought together in a very great and very effective way of using it. But in the process, he obviously has left a lot of things out. And so what he's doing is a different thing from what I'm talking about. So what I'm talking about is a huge variety of meditation practices that all have an element. Mindfulness is a mental factor in the ancient definition. So it goes back to Buddhism, and even before that to Hinduism. The Buddha actually stood on the shoulder of giants in the sort of Hindu context, and they practiced training the mind. And mindfulness is a mental factor that allows you to focus on a particular object, and that's used in every meditation. So it's part of an ancient body of meditative practices, but the actual word mindfulness, it's the mental factor that you use. It's like saying attention, or it's like saying intention, when you have an intention, or in that way you have mindfulness, and mindfulness means bearing something in mind. So it's if you see, it's a big topic. It's a big, I hope so.
Meditation.
Sorry?
It's quite different from meditation.
It is it's used in meditation.
It's used in meditation, but it's not the same as like the monks when they meditate.
Yeah, they use mindfulness.
They don't practice mindfulness, they practice meditation.
Modern mindfulness is mindfulness. It's a meditation. It's a type of meditation which is called mindfulness meditation. But the monks, when they practice, and they're presumably doing some ancient mindfulness practice, some ancient meditation practices, they will use mindfulness to focus on a particular object. So mindfulness as a mental factor.
So that would be, say, Theravada Buddhism.
But say something like just sitting in Zen Buddhism,
Zen.
That sounds much more like what Kabat-Zinn.
Yeah, he was very influenced by Zen. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So actually you can use it in the mindfulness of, say, mindfulness of breathing in order to develop the ability to do the broader just sitting type of mindfulness.
Yeah, you could do, but I don't think you need to. If you're just sitting, then why should you be so rigid about, I don't know, you probably don't need to, I don't know.
Okay.
You see? But what you need to, when you are training your mind and you're training that ability to bear something in mind without getting distracted, you can use that in all walks of life. We can use that in our schools. You know, I've got 2 teenage sons. They could do with more of that. I'm trying my best, so they have come to meditation retreats with me. But, you know, they can really use those attentional skills that we learn in the ancient directing your mind to something. Very useful when you do your work, if you work in a corporate, if you work in a hospital, whatever you're doing, or when you're just talking to your family members and you want to be fully present, you want to direct your mindfulness to them. So these are skills that can help us in any walk of life. So, but I'm very aware of time, so I don't want to cut people off, and I'm happy to linger around for a few more minutes, but I don't know, we probably have to vacate the room, or?
No, we could go on till
11?
10:15.
Okay.
That's half finished.
Yeah. Any more questions in that case?
Can sort of mindfulness be emptiness as well of, you know, the mind? Sort of
Emptiness is a very loaded word, but
you know, just
I think you mean it emptying your mind of thoughts?
yes, completely.
Okay.
Can you be mindful of that as such?
You can become mindful of nothing much happening at all.
That's right.
So when you direct your mindfulness to your awareness, and instead of directing awareness onto an object, like external appearances or thoughts that we did before, you can direct that mindfulness back onto awareness itself and just be aware of being aware, without being aware of anything outside of that.
That's right.
Things will still come up though. Things will, you know, your mind will still can be busy, but at some point, and the more skilled you become at that, I think you know, those monks that we talked about, not me definitely, you will get to that point of being aware of just being aware with nothing else arising to your awareness.
I've experienced it.
You've experienced it. Well, you're more advanced than me, because I
meditate daily for an hour.
Yeah.
In the past,
Great.
It would be completely empty.
Yeah.
Wow.
Completely empty.
Wow.
Nothing coming in. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're mindfully aware of nothing much. Yeah. Great. Yeah. So basically, I offer a variety of different workshops, and some of them are here. Some of them are corporate, go into companies and run programs like that. But one thing I've been offering to individuals such as yourselves is that this Balanced Mind program, and I've got some graduates of my Balanced Mind program in the back there, so you can ask them what it's like. I've been running this I have run it as a 10-week program, but also a few times now as a 2-day weekend program. And so basically my approach to teaching meditation is very much centering around the idea of a balanced mind, which came up a few times today. And it's really thinking about, well, exploring and working with 4 aspects that make up a balanced mind. And they center around wise aspirations, motivations, attentional balance, which again we touched on already, cognitive balance, really seeing reality as it is rather than what we are projecting onto it, and that again came up today, especially in this particular practice, and emotional balance, and that's very much about learning to respond to situations rather than be reactive on sort of automatic pilot, you know, jumping to that usual automatic response or reaction, which often is not very skillful. So we look at these 4 areas of what a balanced mind and a healthy mind would look like, and we tap into things like the idea of happiness and the idea of authentic well-being and sustainable well-being, and how wise aspirations can help us achieve that. So exploring some big issues like that, but also learning some practical meditations for all these 4 areas of a balanced mind, so that we can actually cultivate more balance in our lives in those 4 areas. So it's interesting from the point of view that you can, even if you never meditated, it will be an interesting foray into exploring what a balanced mind would be, and who would look like, and who wouldn't want that. But also learning a whole series of meditations, different meditations, including mindfulness of breathing, including the one we did now, but also meditations that look at emotions, meditations that look at the visual, the auditory, all the 5 senses as well. And also then doing some more investigation through our meditation, not just placing our attention and observing mindfully, but also then investigating some of the, how things really appear and what they're really like, and what we're experiencing coming from, and why are we suffering. So it's, rather than being a philosophical quest, it's more of a, why are we suffering so much through our minds? What is it that we're doing, and what can we stop doing in order to suffer less? By building some really healthy habits of the mind, by not doing what we usually do, because where has it got us? We're facing the same sort of issues, and in our lives, repetitive things come up, and we always suffer because so-and-so has done this and said this to us and put us down, and whatever it is. And can we learn to respond in a more skillful way and cultivate our mind in a more skillful way, that we can suffer less and actually increase our sense of happiness, because we start looking for happiness not in terms of what is reality giving me and in response to which I can feel happy or not, because that's very very volatile and very much out of our control. But how can we find a sustainable happiness that I can bring to the world rather than expect to get from the world? So what can I cultivate in my mind to enable me to be more resilient and to tap into a happiness that's not contingent upon pleasant things happening to us? And that, I think, is a very, worthwhile pursuit, and is actually, that's the meaning of life, really. I mean, if you think about it, we all want to be happy, and we're notoriously rubbish at getting there. So, and this is why, and it's a work in progress. It's not that, I'm offering this course and you walk away and you're going to be fixed in that way. You sound like you don't need any of this anyway. But it's more about, opening our eyes, exploring, and then getting some direction, maybe, if we want to take that challenge and explore what can we do differently, and how can we create some more healthy and happy habits for ourselves. So I've been running these workshops, and they can have different forms, and depending on what people are requiring. So I've done it as a 2-day workshop, which is basically the whole of Saturday, the whole of Sunday. I've done it as a weekday as well. I've done it as a weekly 10-week course, and then another option is to run it as a 4 modules course, which can be half a day long, or it can be 1 day long. And if there is interest, I'm very happy to run one here. I don't know, this looks like a great hall. Very happy to if you've put your names down on my mailing list, and grabbed a business card. I didn't bring very many, but you can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn and all these channels. And if there is interest, and if you want to subscribe to my mailing list, do drop me a line as well and let me know if you're interested, because I'm very happy to put something together if there is interest. But so I've open to that.
In terms of interest, what sort of numbers would you need to be viable?
Well, it depends how expensive the venue is, because I have ended up out of pocket because the venue, can be quite expensive. So it really depends on we can
do the sums. And I mean,
we can do the sums, but it doesn't have to be a huge number, but it can be a big number as well. So there's no reason. We work in small groups as well, so it can be a bigger group, but as long as it's not out of pocket at the end of it. And
perfectly feasible to hire Jubilee Hall here, although I don't think we'd be able to get it for a whole weekend. I think Saturdays are usually taken regularly, so it'd have to be a 1 day at a time type of.
Yeah, and it could be, we can do it in 4 parts. That's very, do 4 sort of workshop, like half-day workshops maybe, or something like that. I'm very happy to be flexible about that because they're different formats.
Well, with the number of people you get, we'll be in touch and we'll look into that, shall we?
Yeah, great.
Well, look, thank you so much for a most
Thank you.
wonderfully
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
wonderfully informative.